Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. The energy transition. Those two words, really easy to say. Really easy. Energy transition. We're going to move away from burning fossil fuels. Yes, we probably are. But I don't think it's easy. In fact, it's mind-bogglingly complicated. It's a challenge of gargantuan proportions. It is just unimaginable how we're going to do it. And yet we kind of really do need to do it. And I've had a very interesting conversation on this very subject from someone that I met at our Everything Electric show in London a few weeks ago, Yasmin Ali. This is her book, Power Up, and she has worked in the oil and gas industry for many years. And she has some very interesting insights into that industry. And she now works in a completely different field, which she will explain. But it's just really interesting to look at the scale and complexity. This book is I really recommend it if you're interested in the topic at all. It's a very it's a very easy book to read, but it doesn't shy away from the complexity of the topic, and it manages to follow that fine line between being technically competent but palatable for the average Joe, Joanna, or whatever. So it was a real joy to meet her, and really interesting to read this book, which I've actually finished. I'm very proud to say. I just rocketed through it. So a lot of her own experiences from her childhood, which is fascinating, which we'll go into, and her education, and then what she decided to do with her life, and all those sort of things. And a really interesting woman, really important topics she deals with. But this book is really, really special. Really impressed with it, and just dealing with this incredibly complex topic that we in effect cover on the Fully Charged show and the Everything Electric show, but maybe not with quite this much a knowledgeable focus. So I'm really pleased that she came on the show. So I won't waffle on about it anymore. Please welcome to the Fully Charged show podcast, Yasmin Ali. So Yasmin, thank you so much for joining me on this. This is so good. We should explain to the listeners that we met at the Everything Electric show in London, and you just rammed a book at me and said, "Read that."
I've got it right here.
Yes, I've got it right here.
Yay.
There we go. And it is fascinating. I had two other books that I had to finish before. I didn't dare start it while I was reading the other book. So it is really fascinating. But I think it's worth just doing a bit of your background, because every now and then when, I read it and I forget about your childhood and your background, just because it's about the topic and it's about your fascination with the world of energy. But I think for a lot of our listeners, you had quite an extraordinary childhood. I went on holiday to Devon when I was 5. That's how exciting my childhood was, So you've had a bit. So can you explain your background briefly?
Yeah, I can. So I was born in Baghdad in Iraq in 1987, which is right between the Iraq-Iran War and the First Gulf War. So that made things a little bit more interesting. It was kind of normal for me because I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
But obviously for my parents, it was quite the experience. And for me, I just remember things like we couldn't get hold of bananas or ice cream, which were foods that I liked and I still like. But more seriously, we had quite regular power cuts and water cuts. So that was the kind of thing that we dealt with. But we left Baghdad in 96 and moved over to the UK. I think it was 98. So I was 11 years old at the time.
Right. So that, but other than that, your family weren't involved in the energy industry or the oil industry or anything like that. That came later, effectively.
Yeah. My parents are doctors, which when I was thinking about careers, I thought that was the only thing I could think of. I didn't know about the energy industry or engineering or anything. So I really fell into that, luckily.
Yes,
quite enjoy it now.
So you do. Well, you clearly do from the book. So we haven't even mentioned the book. Oh, we have mentioned the book.
We have.
I will plug the book again. We'll both plug it. But yeah, that's what comes across is your enthusiasm and joy for the topic, and how you find out about it, which, I definitely related to, but from the standpoint of a kind of slightly confused amateur with zero technical or chemical knowledge or understanding, which you clearly do have in buckets. But then, so then, when did that transition happen? When can you remember where you first went? Oh, I wonder where this electricity comes from, or this petrol, or all those things. I mean,
Yeah, I
were
mean,
they
quite late on, so I decided to study chemical engineering. Again,
right?
just a bit random. I won't go into that. But
Right,
during university, I did a work experience placement at a
right.
gas-fired power station in Lincolnshire,
That's
and
right.
that
Oh,
was
yeah,
where I stepped into that power station, and suddenly I was like, "Oh, okay, I get
yeah,
it now. This is where we produce electricity,
yeah,
and this is what all the cables do that I see all over the country." And suddenly I thought, okay, not this is another career that I can do. I don't have to be a doctor to help people because actually everyone uses energy all of the time. So if I
yeah,
work in this industry, then I'm doing something good. That was the logic, I think.
yeah. Well, I think very sound, and I mean, even doctors need electricity
Exactly, they
nowadays.
do.
So
They need me.
they're desperately reliant on you. But then, so that is interesting. So at that point, then you hadn't really considered, the externalities, if you like, of fossil fuel use. It was just, I mean, I'm totally with you because I was exactly the same. But I mean, so you just saw a gas power station, and the gas came from probably at that stage the North Sea a bit.
Yeah, I didn't know where it came from.
Norway, I don't even know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows? But then, so then did you? That was like a work experience, or like was that while you were at university? You went,
Yeah, so that
right?
was with a company called Eon, which people may have come
Yeah,
across. And then I decided to do a graduate scheme with them. So I applied for that. And that was the beginning. So that was 14 years ago now. And I've
right,
done lots of different things since then.
right. But you've certainly got a fairly good grasp of of the fossil fuel industry. I mean, so what? Because you worked on all sorts of different. Can you go through the list of the places you've worked in that? Because it's quite impressive.
Yeah, so I've worked in coal and gas-fired power stations, and
Right,
then from there kind of stepped back to see where we actually get the fuels from and worked in the oil and gas exploration and production sector. And you get to, well, I got to try all sorts of different modes of transport from helicopters to hydraulic fracturing vessels to platforms and rigs that are out in the middle of the
yeah.
North Sea.
So did you? Because I can't. Did I read about that? Because I remember when there was talk for a TV show of me going out to an oil rig,
Mm,
and they showed me the video of how you train with the helicopter
yes.
turning up. So yeah, you did do that,
Yeah,
didn't you?
I did do that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't. I said I don't want to go to an oil rig that badly, and
Really?
I
Yeah.
chickened out.
It's quite fun. Yeah, there's a couple of different training centers around the country, and they have these like fake helicopters suspended
Yeah,
from cranes above a swimming pool. And you go through it step by step, but the very final step is you're in the helicopter, strapped in, helicopter is dunked into the water, flipped upside down. You then have to remember to undo your belt buckle, push out the window, swim out, and then you pass the course.
I mean, just because in the video of the test in the safety of a swimming pool with people that would pull you out if you didn't make it, terrified the living daylights. It looked absolutely horrific. I just knew I wouldn't be able to cope. I mean, I'm a very poor swimmer. I can swim, but the prospect of being turned upside down while you're strapped in very cold water,
Yeah, so the
I'm
swimming pool
impressed.
was very warm, but
Oh, was it? You had a warm swimming pool?
yeah,
Oh,
we
right,
did. Yeah, so
right.
it was very unrepresentative of what would have happened in
Yeah,
real life. I think, yeah, in the cold waters of the North Sea, I'm not sure how
yes.
long I would last, to be honest.
But then you have been out on like really. So when you were out on the oil rigs, there was no land on the horizon. You were like way out at sea.
Yeah, no, you just see water all around you, which is
Yeah,
quite nice. It's sort of like
yeah,
a very simple life out there.
yes, yeah.
Not
I'm
very,
sure.
not many options or distractions.
But okay, I now really, really don't want to mention gender, but because the energy industry is quite a heavy and big thing, and it's mostly blokes. But I am really intrigued by the number of women I've met who work in that industry in one form or another. I mean, it's not you are rare, but you're not unknown. I mean, but presumably while you were on that rig, you were the only woman on it. I'm guessing.
I did a couple of trips. I think my first trip I was the only woman, and then the subsequent ones there would be like one or two
Right.
which made things a bit easier because you tend to share rooms. So,
Oh, right.
so if I was there, then that meant one less person was allowed to be on the
Right.
platform.
Oh, I
So
see.
that was a bit of an issue. But
Yeah.
if I could find another woman to take with me,
Yeah.
like some of the reservoir engineers or the geologists were
Yeah.
female, so that helped.
Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, that, yes. Okay. But I mean, then what the one thing that must be, that's taken me years to fully comprehend, from when I first went in an electric car and went, why has anyone done this? What's this about? Why would you bother? To then understanding, oh yeah, okay, so we burn that fuel and it comes out of the ground and it gets refined and it gets transported. You gradually learn that, and then I more. It's really in the last 5 years I've become aware of the sheer gargantuan scale of the global fossil fuel industry and how incredibly reliant we are on it. I mean, it's not. Because you can sort of go, oh, I don't burn petrol anymore because my car's electric. Well, you're an absolute tosser because your lettuce was brought to the supermarket on a diesel truck, you numbskull. So it is that I've become horrendously aware of it, and presumably when you do that and you see the scale of the industry that extracts this fuel and transports it, it is mind-boggling. I mean,
It is. And I mean, I only worked in the UK and did a couple of visits to Norway, and they're tiny compared to what the likes of Saudi Arabia or
yeah,
Russia are doing, and the US. So,
yeah,
yeah, and I think the picture for renewables is looking more positive, but we still rely on fossil fuels very, very heavily. I think it's
yeah,
about 80% of our energy use
yeah.
is fossil fuel.
And a big chunk of the rest is nuclear. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of hydro around as well. That's quite an old technology that's been around for a long
yes,
time. So
yeah,
that does play quite a bit of a part.
yeah,
Yeah, the wind farms and solar, not quite as large, I guess, as some people might imagine, but it's growing at a very
yeah,
fast rate. So that's
yeah.
promising.
But then, so then through this process, it strikes me as you've become more aware of the downsides, I guess, of burning fossil fuels and then looking at the alternatives. I mean, can you explain that part of your journey? Because it's from such a well-informed place. That's what I think is special about it, is that I've done it. It's so external to the realities of the fossil fuel industry. It's a few arguments and discussions I've had with various people, and then I've come to some conclusions, but they're fairly hazy. I'm very prepared to admit that. Whereas you've actually seen it close up.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that happened during my career was just that awareness of climate change
Yeah,
increased around me and for me in my own head as well. And then there's all the political
yeah,
side, which I've always been a little bit aware of being from Iraq.
yeah,
And I've always, well, I guess after going over to Norway, I was a bit jealous because I was like, why isn't Iraq like this? We've got
yeah.
oil too. Why have
That's
they dealt with it so much better than we did? And
yeah,
my family's had to leave, and I've become this kind of hybrid British Iraqi, but not really quite either of them person.
yeah. No, it is shocking, isn't it? And I mean that kind of understanding of what it was in fact an economist in Oxford explained that to me. And I felt so stupid a few years ago that a petrostate, the concept of a petrostate is the government doesn't need to raise taxes from the people because it's got this massive income from selling fossil fuel. Therefore, the people don't have any representation. Therefore, you can get some fairly eccentric figures that rule various petrostates around the world.
Yeah, yeah. But then yeah, it's the climate change stuff as well, which
Yeah,
everyone's very aware of now. And I did always feel a little bit a pang of guilt working in oil and gas.
right.
So eventually, I was actually made redundant, which
Oh, right,
was quite handy because I was thinking of leaving anyway.
right.
So yeah,
Oh goodness, but you actually, oh my God, you're actually made redundant. Yeah, that's slightly different.
yeah.
I thought I had this vision of you storming bravely out of a large headquarters or
I
something.
wish, but yeah, no, I'm not quite that brave. I was thinking about it, but then yeah, the part of the
Yeah,
company I worked for was sold, and a whole bunch of people
right.
were made redundant. So
Oh,
I
right.
walked
I mean,
off at
that's
that
the
point.
because were you with Eon at the end of your career with them? At the end of, I mean, who? Or you don't have to say who it was, but it was presumably a fossil fuel company that you were working for.
Yeah, it was Eon. So they had a
Right.
small oil and gas department that they sold.
Ah, right.
Um, and then at that point, the company that bought it didn't need everybody, so they got rid of
Right.
some people. Yeah, and it's changed hands a couple of times, I think,
Right.
since I was there.
I didn't realize. I must admit, I didn't realize Eon. I just assume I always connect them with French nuclear and
That's
Hinkley Point C. And
that's EDF. It's a very
oh
common
yes,
mistake.
Eon. Sorry, I'm so thick.
Yeah,
Well
it's
done. You see,
okay.
you're in the industry. There's proof. I did that on purpose to show that you know what you're talking about. I
Yeah.
so wish. No, that is okay. Okay, no, that yes, of course. Yeah, yeah. So Eon are an oil and gas company, aren't they? I mean, that's their business, isn't it?
They're a German utility company, so
Right,
they owned a lot of coal and gas fired power stations, and then they had a big renewables portfolio as well, which has
right.
now changed hands and is with RWE, and that I work for
That's
that
who I've heard of.
company now.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I did know. Now I remember because now it's in the books. Yes, so RWE are a German company, aren't
Yeah,
they?
they
But,
are.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And does the R stand for renewable or something
No,
else?
it
Probably doesn't.
stands for something in German,
Yeah.
Rheinisch, which I
Right.
think is the name of the region,
Yes. Yeah.
or I think it's the name of the river in the region where they were originally set up.
Right. Right. So now you're working. I mean, so what is your role then within that company now? What are you up to?
So I'm doing green hydrogen project development. So looking
Right.
at setting up green hydrogen projects in the UK and looking at taking renewable electricity to produce green hydrogen, which I think makes sense in some circumstances. But for me, if something can be electrified, that's what we should do.
Yeah.
But I think the UK is just not quite set up for us to be able to do that for certain applications, like,
Right.
for example, industry, where they need
Yeah.
huge amounts of heat. And in a perfect world, I would put in electric boilers, but
Right.
it just doesn't quite work today. So a lot of industrial processes are looking at replacing natural gas use with low carbon hydrogen.
Right. Because I mean, that's my big bugbear with it, with hydrogen, I suppose, is that, at the moment, I don't know what the percentage is, incredibly high percentage of commercially available hydrogen is steam reformed from natural gas. And in that process releases CO2. So the actual hydrogen, spotless, perfectly clean. But the process in getting it is slightly questionable. But then what you're talking about is which is how we should do hydrogen. It's splitting water effectively using electricity. That's a crude way of
Yeah,
describing it?
no, that's a perfect
Yeah.
way of describing it. That's exactly that's the direction that we're trying to head in.
All right.
So that's what you might hear people say green hydrogen, and that's what
Yeah.
they mean. They mean take a renewable electricity supply and use that to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. You may also hear people talk about blue hydrogen. So that's
Yes.
that traditional process that you just described of
Right.
splitting fossil fuels into hydrogen and carbon dioxide, but
Right.
doing carbon capture and storage.
Sorry. Yes.
So that again, there's like mixed opinions on that because it's
Yes.
prolonging the existence of the fossil fuel
Yeah.
industry, but it's thought to be cheaper. So
Right.
producing green electricity is very expensive.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the
Green
weird
hydrogen, sorry.
green height. Yeah, yeah. I mean, just to go back quickly to carbon capture storage. I mean, one of the weird quirks of my bizarre television career is before I started Fully Charged, I did a series for a long time called "How Do They Do It." One of the two episodes that have really stayed with me. One was at a massive oil refinery in Pembrokeshire, and the other was at Draxby in Yorkshire, which at that time was still burning coal. And now it burns. It's renewable because it burns wood chips from virgin forest in Canada, which is very sensible. West Coast Canada. It transports wood on a ship from Vancouver to Yorkshire. Anyway, they showed me their carbon capture and storage installation, and I'm talking about 1998.
Oh wow.
possibly around
Okay.
then. And it wasn't working, but when that works, we'll have a completely clean. And I know it still isn't working. It's never worked, and it would cost an absolute fortune to run it and make the electricity, uneconomic. So, but I mean, anyway. I don't know whether you have opinions. I've just given you my opinion. It's not my place to give my opinion. I've done it.
On carbon capture
On
and
carbon
storage.
capture and storage, I'm not
Yeah,
convinced.
I
Convince
think
me it's a good idea.
yeah, I think it's a good idea in applications where we can't do anything else. So
Right,
power generation, I'm not super convinced by because we've got alternatives.
yeah,
But if you look at cement manufacture, for example,
right,
the actual process, the chemical process of producing cement emits carbon dioxide. So there's not really much you can do to
right,
decarbonize that. But yeah, it's quite the energy system and the whole kind of carbon emissions thing is quite complicated,
oh
and
god, it's
it's
so
not,
complicated. Yeah,
yeah, it's like it's easy to say, oh, that's a stupid idea, but then when you start looking
yeah,
into it, you realize that actually maybe we do need to do this. So I'm reading a book at the moment called Intervention Earth, which takes a bit of a wider look at climate change,
right,
and it seems like we've already overshot our carbon emissions targets.
yeah,
So we may have to do carbon capture and storage just to pull ourselves back.
right,
Um, yeah, there are people looking at direct air capture, which
yeah,
is sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which seems completely absurd to me. But again,
yeah.
we might just get to a
We
point
might
where
have to. We might
we
not
have
have the
to.
choice. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah,
yeah.
it's we're in a bit of a crazy place, I think.
Yes, and I think it is the scale of the challenge is just so huge. It's very hard for any individual to go. Well, I do recycle my jam jars. Go. Well, that's good. Don't stop.
Yeah, yeah,
But in the
yeah,
grand scheme, that's not making very big dent in it.
no.
But that, yes, I don't want to get lost in that. But I mean, okay. So here, one of the arguments I've heard, and I mean, I have always said, people say, "Oh, hydrogen is the future," and they're talking specifically about cars.
Mhm.
I always go, "Yeah, please make it the future." The second car I ever drove on the Fully Charged show was a hydrogen fuel cell Honda. The Honda Insight, brilliant car, absolutely brilliant. Where is it now? Why aren't there tens of millions of them all around the world? And then the Toyota Mirai, I drove that, and the Hyundai Nexo, all brilliant, amazing hydrogen fuel cell cars with long range, all those things. And that, I don't think that is going to work. And I think from your book, I think you're of a fairly similar opinion. But one of the arguments about doing the work you're doing, which is why I'm interested in it, is the kind of steps involved and the energy cost of those steps. That you generate 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. How many kilowatt hours of hydrogen do you get out of it at the end? And there seems to be I bet it's improved. Is that technology improving? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean the electrolyzer efficiency is improving. I can't quite remember the numbers off the top of my head, but you obviously lose efficiency in every
Yeah.
step of the process. But that happens with electricity generation as
Yeah.
well. It happens probably with ICE engines too. So I'm not sure what the efficiency of those are, but it's
Don't ask.
yeah.
It's terrible.
But yeah, I guess on the hydrogen fuel cell cars point, maybe it's a refueling problem, and I think if we have a future where our heavy goods vehicles are hydrogen powered, because
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the battery technology is there for a heavy goods vehicle or if it can get there. Maybe it can, I don't know. But if we go down a hydrogen route, then we would have hydrogen refueling stations for those, and then
Yeah.
at that point you might see more hydrogen passenger vehicles, and it's probably good to give people that option anyway, whether you want to have an EV or a hydrogen fuel cell
Yeah.
car in the future. I think there could be space for both of them. I'm
Yeah.
I'm I think I've got to a point now where I think anything's possible and we
Yes,
need to do it
absolutely.
all. Let's not
Yeah.
rule anything out.
And I always think of it as if I'm cycling along a road and a diesel bus overtakes me, it's horrible. And if a battery electric bus overtakes me, fine. And if a hydrogen fuel cell bus overtakes me, it's fine. I'm happy with either. Anything's better than a diesel one,
Mhm.
So I'm definitely
Yeah,
not opposed
exactly.
to it at all. I mean, I think it has been used in a sense as an argument by, I'm going to be sexist again, but at my own gender, is some men who don't want to change. So they go, well, hydrogen is the future, but in the meantime, I'll carry on driving my 3-ton SUV that burns a lot of fossil fuel. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. But then I just want to go back to your book, because I love the way you've broken it down, and it's actually very inspiring. That it's essentially the 4 bits are how you make it, how you generate power, how you move it. I've not even thought about that. Brilliant. I loved how you move it. And then how you use it, I suppose. Those are the 3 sort of the key things. But tell me about, because pipelines, I mean, I do know about pipelines. And I've been, many years ago, I had a long email conversation with a man, a Native American, and I can't remember what tribe he was from. He's a lovely guy, and they had a massive pipeline across their land, which had been their land, given them. They kept it from the American government for hundreds of years, and a massive pipeline went across it. And after 1 year, it burst and caused untold damage, horrendous. This is tar sands from Canada. It's just,
yeah,
the whole thing was so disgraceful.
Yeah,
it was just bad. This is the thing that I've been banging on about recently, is legitimate concerns from people about mining materials. But everything we consume is either grown or dug up, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing else.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And I think if people, I think people don't really make that connection between, you go to a shop and you buy something, and then in the same breath you complain about mining operations. It's a little bit. We have to change our behaviour, and that people don't want to change their behaviour. But yeah, pipelines are quite fascinating. I tried to avoid politics in the book as much as possible, but I couldn't quite get away from it with pipelines. I started writing in 2021, and part of that chapter is about the Nord Stream pipelines. And then the Russia-Ukraine war started, and I had to just keep going back to update and change, because that had such a huge impact on the Nord Stream pipelines. I don't know if people realize that there's a second set of pipelines, Nord Stream 2, which were built, commissioned, and then never used. So there's this asset at the bottom of the sea that we're probably never going to use unless there's some major political changes.
Yeah. And I mean, have you got a clue, any sort of ballpark figure of the cost of that? Because they're not cheap, are they, pipelines?
No, I can't quite remember. I think I did write it into the book, but it's in the billions, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
many billions. Yeah.
Because it's probably one of the longest, if not the longest, subsea pipeline in the world.
Right, anyway.
And you imagine, if you imagine putting a pipeline down on land, how difficult that is, and then do that on the seabeds, the costs just go up.
Well, your description of the engineers that worked that were divers, that worked underwater, but then because I've done some scuba. I'm not good at this. We keep going back to my terror of deep water and being tipped upside down. But I've done sort of scuba diving and old-fashioned diving helmet stuff for stupid TV shows. No, brilliant TV shows. Sorry, and but the description that they go into a kind of a box that then gets filled with air so they can weld a pipe. I don't know why that just and then they take all their stuff off while they're in there. I was just no, keep it on. Terrifying. What a job, though. I mean, my God, we cannot imagine that.
It's pretty incredible. It's probably a bit like being an astronaut, because there's so few of them, and they go into such a unique environment. Yeah.
No, terrifying. But then, I mean, I don't know how it's so hard to avoid an element of politics. It's geopolitics rather than party politics in any one country. But the fact that Europe was so dependent on Russia for its energy, which and it wasn't started out as an evil thing. It was, when you were very young, when the Berlin Wall came down and perestroika, and that time when effectively, I think America and Europeans actually helped the Russian people to come out of the regime they'd been living under, and encouraged them to become capitalists. And some of them became very big capitalists. But, that would have been a kind of quite a benign decision to go, let's buy gas from Russia, we'll help support the Russian economy and help them raise themselves up. It wasn't a sort of utterly stupid idea. It was only when 20 years later you go, oh, shit.
That's how these things happen, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
the same as the energy system that we have today. It's not
Yeah.
like someone sat down and designed it. It's just
Yeah.
grown over, it's over 100 years now. And now we're stuck. Well, we're not stuck, but we have what we have, and we need to adapt it to the future.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, we're wandering all over topics because I'm very bad at that. I'm trying to stay focused. I'm going to stay focused. But the energy, the kind of research and development that's going into the projects you're working on then on green hydrogen. We're not talking like a little laboratory experiment. I'm presuming this is a fairly big industrial scale production units is what you're developing.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at. So commercially viable, large scale, kind of 100 plus megawatt electrolyzer projects.
Wow, that sounds big.
Mm-hmm.
That does sound big.
Yeah.
Oh, right. And then is that connected to sort of offshore wind farms, or are you developing wind? Or how are you? Where are you getting the electricity from?
The plan or the idea is to connect to the grid and then have green power purchase agreements in the background to provide your green electricity. So the UK government has a whole kind of subsidy scheme in the background called the hydrogen allocation round. If anyone's interested, I would look that up. And there's a whole bunch of rules about how your hydrogen qualifies as low carbon.
Right. Which is, I think, kind of good. I'm very happy about that.
It's good.
It's a good thing. Yeah. But then on the other, so the thing that I think you've probably got a really good handle on is quite how big a challenge we are facing, in a sense, to, maybe in your lifetime. It's definitely too late for me in my lifetime, but it may be in your lifetime to see a huge reduction in our reliance on fossil fuel. I don't believe I don't think we should even. I think it's really useful material. I don't think we should stop extracting and using it. But I think if we burnt quite a lot less, it's probably quite a good thing.
That would help. Yeah, that would be a good start. Yeah.
But I mean, do you think, do you think A, it's possible, and B, how we might do it?
I think I have to think that it's possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. I think we've got the technology, we've got the people. It's just more of a coordination problem and working together. I don't know if you ever follow the COPs. And,
yes, from a distance.
Mess that sometimes is. But how do we do it? I think it depends on the geography. So each region has its own strengths and weaknesses. So the UK is very strong on wind power. So I think each area has to take advantage of what it's good at, and then we need to share as well. So there's lots of interconnectors between the UK and Ireland and mainland Europe to share electricity. And I think that kind of thing across the world will help different regions to decarbonize their electricity systems. Transport is a really big user of energy. I think sometimes when people think of energy, they just think of electricity, but that's only I think it's about a fifth of the total energy use that we use globally. So we have to think about how we decarbonize transport, shipping, aviation, manufacturing, all that other stuff as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is, yes, the kind of, it's the thing that I constantly have to sort of repeat is that any individual selling a petrol car and buying an electric car is step 0.0001 of the process. I mean, because I've just driven the largest size articulated lorry, semi-truck, whatever you want to call it, in the UK, Mercedes, purely electric, battery electric, which was, that stuff is so critical that the kind of earth-moving equipment, the delivery things, everything. The cars will happen, I think, whatever. But I think that the really big challenges are the bigger transport, as you say, and shipping is mind-boggling. I mean,
Yeah,
it's this
and
weird thing.
aviation as well. I mean,
And
people,
aviation
yeah,
is,
people aren't going to stop flying, and
no,
as the let's call it the global south, or I don't know what the correct term is, people there are going to start flying more as well,
yeah,
as they should. They've got
yeah,
the right to.
yeah, we did.
So yeah,
Why can't
exactly.
they?
Well, we still do. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Although I have read numerous times now that all air transport, all planes,
Hmm.
it tots up to between 4 and 5% of global CO2 emissions. It's not like 50%. It's quite a small percentage. It's still big,
It
but
is,
it's
I
not.
think, but I mean, each different sector, the numbers sound quite small, but then they all add up. So I think,
Yeah, yeah.
cement manufacturing is
It's
around
huge, isn't it? Yeah,
8% or
yeah.
something. Ammonia is somewhere in the single
Right,
percent as well,
right.
which sounds small, but I think that's almost the same as the energy use from like a country like Germany, for example.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, it sounds small, but it all adds up to that
Yes.
big total.
Yes. Oh God, yes, it does. And I mean, because it was a note I made from your book, which is a transport. So it's a third of all energy consumption, but that would include shipping, flying, ground transport. Everything is a third, which is a big chunk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think the ground transport part is the largest of that chunk,
Yeah.
um,
And
followed by air travel and then shipping. So shipping's actually relatively low carbon.
yeah.
So you
Well,
talked about Drax
yeah,
moving wood
yeah,
chip from Canada to the UK. That will be quite a low carbon trip
yeah.
compared to, for example, trucking wood chip from Scotland down to I don't know,
Down to
somewhere in
Drax
the south
probably
of
is. Yeah,
England.
yeah. No, I mean I mean, I think there was a Hannah Ritchie who we
Oh yeah.
interviewed at
Mhm.
there. That was her one that got me, was that it's actually better for me to eat an avocado that comes from South America than a piece of beef that is literally the other side of that wall is a
Mhm.
field
Mhm.
with a cow with loads of cows in it, and that is more intensive. It's one of those counterintuitive things. But there was another. Oh, I had another question that was really pertinent to that. Oh yes, A, will it happen? B, there was. Can you remember my A and B?
Will it happen? How? I think
And
you
then
said.
how do we? Yes, I
Yeah.
can't even remember if it was how. Right, I want you to know that you're being interviewed by a highly professional person with a lot of experience. How the hell do we do? No, wait. Yes, I know. Good, good, good. It's come back. It's come back. The old brain is still just about working. Because you've studied chemistry, the question I want to know is: you've got a barrel of oil, and you take it into an oil refinery, and you put it in one of those cracking towers. I've spent quite a long time in an oil refinery, and you use huge amounts of electricity and quite a lot of oil to heat it up to do what you do with it. Could you transform that barrel of oil into products that aren't fuel, or is the fuel a natural part of that process and there's nothing you're going to do about it? Even if you decide not to burn it, you're going to end up with a load of fuel.
Just a small correction. I studied
Okay.
chemical engineering.
Yes.
No,
But I mean,
I
I thought
think
that's a chemical process
yeah,
that's
yeah,
going on
definitely is.
in
We
there.
spent a
Yeah.
lot of time studying distillation columns.
Right.
I hate them. You're giving me
I,
horrible flashbacks.
I'm sorry. I do
Um,
remember climbing up the tower that went around a distillation column, and it's just being on a big building that I knew was safe and it wasn't going to fall over, but it was going like this. So you're standing on this thing that's going, and the noise was unbelievable.
yeah.
Just a huge industrial process. Anyway, yes.
Yeah, but to answer your question, yes, you could. So what the distillation column does is split the crude oil by what they call fractions. So depending
Yes.
on the length of the carbon chain. But if you had the very light stuff tends to be used for chemicals. So you could take the heavier carbon products and break them down into something that's lighter and use them to make plastics or something like that.
Right.
So I think do.
So you could have an oil refinery that refined crude oil. I think this is a critically important point, that refined crude oil into really useful products that we need: fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, plastics, all those things that are, but not produce jet fuel, diesel, petrol.
I believe so. I think they
Right.
may have to put in new process
It might
units
be
in
a different
place to be
system.
able to
Yeah.
do that. But in theory and scientifically, I would say yes, that there's no reason why that's not possible, because you just
Right.
take your heavier oil and you kind of break it down into something that's into something smaller that can be used for those types of things. So yeah, I'm
Right.
going to say yes.
Oh, good, because I've wondered this for a long time. I
Okay.
don't, and that was that, having that 2 days filming there and being told a huge amount of information. I don't know how long ago, nearly 20 years ago, in an oil refinery.
Mhm.
And what was tragic about that was the following year, and I don't know the name of the oil refinery now. It's in Pembrokeshire, South
Mm.
Wales.
Mhm.
There was a terrible fire and explosion, and 4 of the people were killed there. And I know one of them was the engineer that I interviewed, who
Oh
was an
no.
amazing man.
Yeah.
Just and really kind, like someone who could communicate quite
Mhm.
complicated things, but without being condescending or annoyed. Really sad. And then you realize, oh my God, I felt dangerous when I was there.
Mhm.
It did feel like this place could go any minute, thinking it never would, and it did. It's just
Yeah,
horrifying.
these things happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. Um, and the other, so that is good. Thank you for answering that. Even if you're not 100% correct, I think you're probably more correct than most of the people who like to pontificate on YouTube comments.
Yeah,
You're more likely to.
you'd have to put in more energy. I mean, usually we
Right,
can do most
right.
things, but we need to
We need
yeah,
to use more energy to do
yeah,
it.
because
Yeah,
you're taking a long carbon chain and you're putting in energy to break it down into something else
right.
or something shorter.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the other things I learned, which I know you'll know this, is the amount of electricity that a oil refinery uses. I
Hmm.
had no idea.
Hmm.
That when I saw the substation next to the refinery, I thought it was because the process generated electricity and they were sending it out. That's how thick I was. I was really impressed. Who knew that refining oil would produce all this electricity? Yeah, it was coming the other way. Let's quickly do. Oh God, yes, internet energy
Oh
use. So
yeah,
we have. I
yeah,
wonder how much we've used, just like you and I just talking now.
yeah.
But then add to that when 30,000 people download it, 50,000, 100,000 people download it and listen and watch. That's a staggering thing that is very well hidden from us.
It is, and it's not. I tried to find an answer to this. I googled how much energy does the internet use, and
Yeah.
it's not that straightforward, because you've
No.
got it's quite a lot of different things. So at our end, it's all of the electricity that's used by the devices. So I've got my laptop here and my phone and whatever. You've got the servers that store all the data that are being constantly
Yeah.
cooled. There's other stuff I can't quite remember now. I found a lot of varying numbers for
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
much all of that uses, and you've got devices that are constantly being connected and just taken out of that system, so it's quite hard to
Yeah.
keep track of. I think from everything that I read, that the all of that, the kind of our use of the internet uses about 1% of global energy
Oh, right. Okay.
supply. So it's not
Right.
massive, but that's
No.
only going to get bigger
Yeah.
when you think about everything that's happening, more people being connected, having more devices. We're like so much more reliant on computing and the internet
Yeah.
and AI and all of that stuff coming
Yeah.
in. I mean, some of that, when you're training those deep learning models, that can be very, very energy intensive.
Yes.
So, this is probably an area where we know that it's going to be an issue before it's become an issue. And if we're
Yeah.
clever about it, maybe we can do something now. But
Yes. I
yeah.
don't know. I just heard an interview this morning on a podcast when I was driving in an electric car. So I was, sorry, I wasn't driving. I was virtue signaling. That's the only reason I do it. That Chat GPT, the non-profit arm of that, are looking to invest $1 trillion in servers in the not like next week, in the next 10 years, because that's how much they need. But it's gone into the trillions, and there was a long row about whether it really was over $1 trillion or under $1 trillion. It was they agreed it was around $1 trillion, which I don't even know what that means. That's just so much.
Yeah, yeah. I
It's a
mean,
lot of computers.
it is. I'm just thinking
Yeah.
about all of the the electricity needed to keep that
Oh,
going.
unbelievable.
It's going to be
Yeah.
quite
And it is
enormous.
I have tried to shoot something at a big server farm in the
Mhm.
United States, and we couldn't get permission. They just
Oh,
don't,
right. Okay.
when they knew why, because I was interested in the energy use. I
Mhm.
think you would get permission if you were a data scientist or that's a different thing. But
Mhm.
the scale of the energy use, I think they're not keen to advertise it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they tend to, not in all cases, but I think they tend to try and put them in cold
Yeah,
locations to
and near
reduce.
hydroelectric plants as well is
Yeah,
very popular.
yeah.
Because the power is cheaper. So what do you, in your say the next 10 years, how do you see what you're doing developing? What do you hope will happen? Because I think it's worth us going over the industrial uses of hydrogen, because I think our listenership will probably think of hydrogen and transport use and be either excited about that or skeptical, but actually the industrial use is so much more important, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So today we make ammonia, which is made up of nitrogen and hydrogen.
Right.
For every kilogram of hydrogen that's produced, we're releasing 8 kilograms of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So if we switch
Right.
that
Wow.
over to
Sorry, say that
green,
again. So so this is in what we were talking about earlier on, the steam reform natural. If
yeah,
we take
yeah, yeah,
hydrogen from natural gas,
yeah.
do that
So
calculation again. I didn't quite.
each kilogram of hydrogen, you
Yeah.
release 8 kilograms of carbon dioxide into the
Right.
atmosphere.
Yeah, that's not so good.
It's quite a lot. So if you replace that, we need ammonia. We use that to make fertilizer.
Right.
That fertilizer is essential for growing all of the
Yeah.
crops and the food that we need to feed the world. That 8 billion people on the planet. Half of those 8 billion people wouldn't exist if we didn't have synthetic
Right.
fertilizer production. We just
Wow.
wouldn't have enough
Yeah.
nitrogen in the soil to be able to grow the plants and feed them. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah. No, it's important, critically important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if we were to replace that hydrogen production with green hydrogen production or some kind of low carbon hydrogen production, then you're already taking quite a bit of carbon dioxide emissions out of the atmosphere there.
Yeah.
So that for me is like, there's no argument about whether we should do that or not. That's just
Yeah.
super obvious.
Yeah.
And any other kind of chemical process where you need hydrogen, let's just replace that with low carbon hydrogen.
Yeah.
Then you get to industry, so industrial processes that need a lot of heat that today burn natural gas. They're looking at switching to hydrogen. Now, I think ideally if they could electrify, but I can't really
Yeah.
see that happening anytime soon. And then you get to like your heavy goods vehicles and aviation. I've spoken to a couple of the aviation organizations, and they're thinking
Right.
about hydrogen combustion airplanes in the longer term, because
Right. Oh, right.
there's quite limited options, really. I mean, the
Yeah.
other thing that is happening as well is people are looking at producing almost like a synthetic fossil fuel. So
Yes.
fossil fuels are made up of carbon and hydrogen. So if you produce low carbon hydrogen and you capture carbon from some sort of industrial process,
Yeah.
jam those together, then you get your liquids kind of fossil fuel like
Right.
fuel. So that's something that is being looked at as well. Very expensive, but
Right.
we're finding ourselves at a point where we have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it sounds a lot more benign, sensible, and plausible than biofuel. I'm not really a big fan of biofuel.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think we need to eat.
yeah, biofuel's another contentious one, isn't it? Because of the space that it
Yes.
may occupy.
Yeah.
But then, if people ate less meat, then we would free up quite a lot of land.
Yes, we
So
would.
there's stuff that we can do to
Which
free up more land.
yeah. And I'm very happy to eat no meat, but I'm really tragically, I still do eat dairy, which I know enough about farming, as that was the first job I did, to know that you can't do dairy without a little bit of butchery and animal rearing, which is
Yeah.
so annoying because I quite like a bit of cheese. But you're absolutely. It is really. Anyway, that is another topic.
It is.
I don't think you. Yeah.
It's an interesting one because no government will touch it.
No. Oh, you imagine if. Yeah. Imagine if the potential next Labour administration said, and another thing we're going to do is ban meat.
Yeah, that would not go down well. But it's genuinely, it's going to have to be part of the solution. It's just who's going to be brave enough to tackle that issue? I look forward to seeing.
I think you should stand for Parliament as a vegan. The vegan party. No, I mean, it is really difficult. It is really, well, I mean, I think in a sense, all of the things that the people who have got an understanding of the scale and the challenge that's involved, there's an element of, look, you really shouldn't burn fossil fuels in a car while you're sitting still outside a school. Can we start there? Waiting for your kids. And I think there is an element of like the smoking bans that came in. I mean, you're too young to remember, but I do. There's been a what was it on? A TV show on recently, sort of set back when I was young. Everybody is smoking in it. And of course I go, yeah, that's what was happening. Everywhere, on a plane, in a train, on the underground in London, everywhere, on a bus, everyone smoked everywhere all the time.
I can't really imagine that on the underground.
No, I don't know what it was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. Yeah. And there was a horrible fire at King's Cross Station directly as a result of someone dropping a cigarette. A lot of people killed. It was really horrific. But that sort of consciousness has changed, and you now go, yeah, look, do you mind? You wouldn't be frowned upon if someone lit up a cigarette in a pub, and you go, can you do that outside? They just wouldn't. And so maybe we'll get to a point where if you're sitting outside a school in your SUV waiting for your child, you won't have your engine running. But I don't know. We haven't got there yet.
Yeah, I mean, you're just killing all the children by doing that. Yes. Yeah.
I think there is a bell ringing faintly in the background of people that do that. I suppose what would be great is if no, I don't think it's fair to ask you if you're optimistic, but you're optimistic enough to keep working. I suppose that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I am optimistic. Depends what day you ask me on, but I'm generally quite an optimistic person. So yeah, I am optimistic. I'm realistic as well. I think we'll move, probably not fast enough, but we'll make big changes over the coming years.
Yeah. And I mean, what's been how long has your book been out now? I can't remember. How long
it came out on the 28th of March, so it's been out.
So it's still pretty good. But have you had good feedback about it? I mean, I want to give you good feedback now. I mean, I'm really impressed with it. I think it's great. I'm holding it up so that people can see. Yeah, I think we should both do it. Power up. It is really, I mean, you've had great little quotes on the back. That's very, very good.
Yeah, I got a quote from Mike Berners-Lee recently, which I was quite happy with.
Oh, I've never had one of those. I'm very jealous.
He said it was very engaging.
Yeah, oh, good. But it is because I think I would encourage people to read it simply because it's not, blindingly technical, but it also doesn't gloss over complicated topics. You really communicate the science of what's going on really well. So that is... and I am familiar with most of the things you're talking about, but I also learnt a lot and was not, because I've read books that I'm intimidated by simply because they're set at a scientific level that's beyond my grasp, and I feel inadequate because I don't understand it. Whereas you manage to communicate really clearly, complicated, really difficult things, and occasionally political things without being political. But Yasmin, thank you so much for talking to me. And I mean, thank you for stumbling along with my often unfocused questions. And also, I just want to say congratulations on the book and good luck with the projects you're working on now. And also, we'll see you in Harrogate for sure. And I think some other live events that we're doing in the future, if you're able to join us. But no, it's really, really good to talk to you. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really hope you enjoyed that. What a great conversation. I must admit, I had a bit of brain fog in the middle. You may have noticed. Well, I say in the middle, I'm being generous to myself. I had a bit of brain fog. Just leave it there. Please do tell your friends about this podcast and the old man that occasionally appears on it with his brain fog. And do subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Lots of amazing new episodes coming up. And that's all. As always, if you have been, thank you for watching and listening.